So today we're going to learn how to complete the square, which is then going to become another way that you can solve quadratics by completing the square. So we have this problem, x squared minus 2x plus something. So what you're asking yourself is, what can we add to make this a perfect square trinomial? So we just got finished factoring perfect square trinomials and solving by factoring. And so now we want to know, what could we put here to make this a perfect square trinomial? Okay, so if you can't think of something, here's a way that you can figure it out easily using algebra. So how to find the square? What you're going to do is you're going to take the b term. So that's the middle term. Make sure you take the sign with it. So the middle term is -2. Then step 2 is you're going to divide b by 2. So we have -2 divided by 2, which gives us -1. Step 3 is that we square our answer. So we have -1 squared, which is 1. And then lastly, we put that number in the box. So that completes the square. So the 1 is what goes in there to complete the square. And now we can double check to see if that is actually a perfect square trinomial. So you have the first term as a square and the second term as a square. And so we can actually say x minus 1, and it's x minus 1 squared. So it is actually a perfect square trinomial. Alright, so let's actually try this. Okay, here we go. So what we're looking for is what goes in the box. So to make this a perfect square trinomial, what goes in the box? So if you remember, we take the b term, which is 5. Second, we divide it by 2. So 5 divided by 2. Please do not turn this into a decimal. Just leave it as an improper fraction, just like it is. Step 3, square your answer. So 5 squared would give us 25/4. Okay, and that number goes in the box. So right here is where we put 25/4. So we write it as x squared plus 5x plus 25/4, and that now makes this a perfect square trinomial. So in other words, it could be factored to x plus 5/2, x plus 5/2. So if I multiply this out to make sure that it does come back to this, I can multiply first, outside, inside, last. When I add together those middle two terms, 5/2 x plus 5/2 x does give me 5x. So therefore it did work. Okay, so that's how I complete the square and how I figure out what goes in the box. So now we're going to talk about, how do I use this to then solve quadratics. Okay, so do not have a panic attack. Just pause the video here and go ahead and copy this down. So I will move out of the way, pause, and write all this down, and then come back to see how you will actually use this. Okay, so how am I actually going to do this? So I have a problem like this. X squared equals 27 minus 6x. Okay? So first, you want to collect all your variables on one side and your constants on the other. So I'm always going to put my variables on the left, so I added 6x, and then the 27 was already on the right. So variables on the left, constants on the right. Alright, next I need to go ahead and complete the square. So you can see here I'm going to complete the square and add that number to both sides. So you can see here I got the b term, which was 6. I divided by 2, which gives me 3. And I square that, and that gives me 9. Okay, so that's how I find the number that goes in the box, if you remember. So I write x squared plus 6x plus 9, and that's going to make this a perfect square trinomial. But what I do to one side, I must do to the other. So I add the 9 to both sides. Alright, next, now that I have the perfect square trinomial, I'm going to simplify this. So in other words, on the left, I'm going to factor it and turn it into the factors of the perfect square. And on the right, I'm just going to add those terms. So you can see over here, perfect square trinomial on the left, add the terms together on the right. So now I'm left with this. Okay, from this point, now I can just take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of the left, take the square root of the right. So once I take the square root of the left, I'm left with just x plus 3. And then on the right, I have plus or minus 6. So it's important that you remember that it has to be plus or minus, because I don't really know if that's a plus 6 or a minus 6. Okay, so next. The last step is that I solve both equations. So one of my equations is x plus 3 equals 6, and my other equation is x plus 3 equals negative 6. I solve both of them, and therefore I get that my zeros are x equals 3 or x equals negative 9. So it could be either of those. My solutions are 3 and negative 9. So remember that what this means is if I graphed this, I would end up getting a parabola that would go through the x-intercept at 3 and negative 9. These are solutions, these are zeros. If I input them into the function, I would get out a 0. Or in other words, this would turn into 0. Okay. Here we go again. Another example. Okay, so this one has a 2 out front in here. So you can only complete the square if the lead coefficient is 1. So if the lead coefficient is something other than 1, you need to factor out the greatest common factor. So here I took out the 2, I took out the lead coefficient. So I took out the 2 and I'm left with x squared plus 4x. And therefore I can then divide both sides by 2. So when I divide this side by 2, that goes away and I'm left with just x squared plus 4x. And then I'm left on the right with 6. Okay, next. Once I've done that and my lead coefficient is now 1, so now I can complete the square. So on the left, I'm going to complete the square by taking the b term, dividing it by 2, squaring it, and then whatever I get, I add. Remember, I put it in the box, so I add it here, but what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So I'm completing the square and adding what I got to both sides. All right, move on to the next step. So now what I have created is a perfect square trinomial. So now I have this perfect square trinomial here, and so I can actually factor it. So on the left, it's a perfect square trinomial, so it's x plus 2, x plus 2. On the right, I added these together, and I got 10. So now I have x plus 2 squared equals 10. Okay, the next step, I square root each side. So I take the square root of the left, and I just get x plus 2. And when I take the square root of the right, I get plus or minus square root 10. So again, it must be plus or minus because I don't know if it's a positive root 10 or a negative root 10. But you should just leave it like that. You should not turn it into a decimal and round it because that's not an exact answer. The exact answer is plus or minus root 10. And then I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2 because the last step is to solve the equation. So when I subtract 2 here, I end up getting negative 2 plus or minus root 10. So those are the two zeros. 1 0 is negative 2 plus root 10, and 1 0 is negative 2 minus root 10. So that's still a real number, so it's on the number line, so I could actually graph it, and that is an actual x-intercept. It's just going to come through at an irrational number. So it's going to come between two numbers, and it's not going to be an exact point, but I could estimate where that point is. All right, let's try one more time. All right, so this one, I just left it blank, so I'm going to walk you through it. Okay, so the first thing, if I see I have a lead coefficient here, the first thing I need to do is get rid of that lead coefficient. So I'm going to take out this 3. And then I want to get rid of it because right now it's just complicating things, so I can divide both sides by 3. So then I have okay, now I left a little space here because I'm going to complete the square. So in order to complete the square, I'm going to take the b term. So I'm going to do this off to the side. So my b term is negative 8. I'm going to divide that by 2. And then I'm going to square that. Okay, so what I'm going to add to both sides is 16. So make sure you add it to both sides. Okay, so now on the left I have a perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is x minus 4 squared. And then on the right I'm going to add these together, so that's going to give me 25. Alright, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So over here, I end up with just x minus 4. And over here, remember, I end up with plus or minus 5. So now I have two equations. And then I solve both the equations. So therefore my zeros in this case are 9 and negative 1. So those are the zeros and they are the solutions to this quadratic equation. 9 and negative 1.